So far, our prefabs have been somewhat complex, but I've been guiding you through them. Now I want to give you a little challenge to build a prefab on your own. But first, I'm going to give you some functionality for that prefab. We're going to create a spike that kills the player whenever they touch it, and your job will be to turn that into a prefab that we can use to reuse throughout our game. So to find our spike, we're going to go to the Art and Tiles folder. Then down somewhere near the bottom, let's see if we can find them, we've got a spikes object. I'm going to zoom in on the scene view a bit. Let's go over here to the big part between my two waters, and I'm going to drag a spikes over to our scene. Now, if it's not set to the right scale, make sure I've selected it and the pixels per unit is 128 and matching the scale here. I'm going to go select my spikes, and then I'm going to reset the position to, this is about a 26 and a negative 3.5 to be just on the ground. We'll add a polygon collider 2D, so I'll search for poly 2D, and then I'll set it to tileable mode. Now that it's in tileable mode, I'll set it to be too wide, and then make sure that the auto tiling checkbox is on. The final thing I need to do is make it kill my player when they touch it. So I'm going to create a new script that kills the player when you touch something. I'm going to go into my scripts folder and I'm going to right click, create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this spikes because that's what it is. It's a set of spikes. So we'll create our spikes script. We'll go to the spikes object and drag the spikes script onto it as soon as it finishes recompiling. Got to give it a second. That happens when we create a new script. So I've got my spikes script there attached to my spikes object. I'm going to capitalize the S here because I want my naming to be nice and clean. And then we'll go open up the spikes script. Inside the spike script, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the other script that we created. We're going to delete our start and update method. So I'll select at the beginning of line 7, all the way to 17, at the end of 17, and then press delete or backspace on the keyboard. Now we're going to check for a collision enter. Remember, in our water, we checked for a trigger enter to see if we went into the water. Spikes aren't going to be triggers. They're going to be actual colliders that things could land on. And if a player lands on it, oh, it'll kill the player. So let's go back to our spikes. And instead of adding an on trigger enter, let's add an on collision enter. So I'll type ONCOL and find that on collision enter 2D. We got to make sure it's the 2D version. I'm going to delete my private keyword because I just don't need it. It's private by default. And then we're going to check if our collision 2D was a player. So we'll say if collision dot, and here we need to get the collider. We're not able to do a compare tag because collision 2D isn't the same as a collider 2D. A 2D collider is the object that you're colliding with. A collision 2D is like this data object that has that collider, but it also has some extra info like how the object collided, where they collided, like what the specific points were. On a trigger, we don't get that info, so you get back the simpler object of just the collider 2D. In fact, if I go look at the water, you see that we get this collider 2D. But in the spikes, that's not what we're getting. We're getting the collision 2D that has a collider on it. Again, because we've got more information on a collision than we have with a trigger. So if the collision.collider.compare tag, because we can get the tag from the collider here, and we pass in player. So this is going to tell us if the collider has the player tag on them, then what we want to do is kill the player. And to kill the player, the easiest thing we can do, the kind of default starting thing we can do is just reload our current level. So to do that, we'll say scene manager dot load scene, and then we just pass in a 0. It's going to reload the first scene in our scene index. And we'll talk about our scene index and our build indexes and all that stuff in just a moment. First, though, let's save. Make sure that everything looks good. We'll go back over to Unity. And then we're going to run over and touch those spikes and see what happens. So we'll save our level here. We need to make sure that we've saved our scene. Press play. We'll run over to our spikes. And go touch them, and we reload into our level. Now, if you're not reloading into the level, what you're going to need to do is go to File and Build Settings. And you may have something else in your scenes and build. If you're loading into some other scene, you're seeing something weird, some demo scene or something else, it's because you have something else in your scenes to build. Perhaps you have the old sample scene. So what you need to do now is, while you have this window open, and even if you haven't had no problem and yours looks just like this, hit the Add Open Scenes button. And then let's make sure that this first entry here is deleted. So I'm going to go select it and hit delete. We want our scenes and build to just contain scenes, level 1, and that's it. Then we'll close it. We don't need to do a build or anything else. We're going to go to File and Save Project. That should, in Plastic SCM, update our editor build settings. We should have our level 1 saved, or our level 1 showing up there, and our spikes. Let's do a commit. Say we added spikes and level 1 to build settings, and we'll check in our changes. And now your job is to turn your spikes into a prefab that you can reuse so that you can have it scale all the way across here, or be a tiny little spike up here that you place however you want. So go ahead and give that a try. I'll let you pause right now and then continue on, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, I'll assume that you're done. Let's go through the process. So let's go back to our project view. Let's go to the assets folder and go to our prefabs folder. I'm going to go select my spikes. And the first thing I'm actually going to do here is adjust the tiling. I'm going to set the tiling down to 1 because I don't want the default to be 2 tiled wide. I want to start with a very small one on my prefab and then just allow my user, my designer, or myself to scale it up to whatever I want. So I'm going to take my spikes now. I'm going to drag this into the prefabs folder, and ta-da, I'm pretty much done. Now I can take this spike object, I can drag it up here on top of this platform if I want, then fix up the position. So we're looking at like a 24.5 and a 3, and then just adjust this scaling here by modifying the tile size. So maybe I want to set this to a 4 like that. Now I've got one that fits all the way across a 4x4 platform. I don't need to make another prefab for it because it just fits. This is kind of the benefit of a prefab. I don't have to make an object for every size. I can override and modify the specific parts that I want. Now, when it came to our platforms, this is not so much the case because we had those 2 edge pieces. But with the spikes, we don't have that problem. We can just make it whatever size we want and place it wherever we want and then scale it up without having to create multiple different prefabs. I like this, so I'm going to save my scene, go into Plastic SCM, say that we've created our Spike Prefab, and check it in.